Daniel had always believed his ranch was a place where peace could not be disturbed. Nestled just outside the neighborhood, the wide fields stretched into the horizon, bordered by an old wooden gate that marked the start of his land. To Daniel, that gate was more than a barrier. It was a symbol of privacy, a reminder that what lay beyond belonged to him and only him. For years, no one questioned it, and no one dared to test it. That was until Karen arrived. Karen had recently become one of the loudest voices in the newly formed homeowners association. She carried herself with the air of someone who believed rules didn't apply to her, yet she demanded that everyone else live by hers. Neighbors whispered about her complaints, about her relentless need to control the smallest details, but no one expected she would turn her attention toward Daniel's ranch. The first clash came without warning. Daniel was brushing down one of his horses when he heard the crunch of gravel, followed by a loud snap that made his chest tighten. He turned just in time to see a cloud of dust and splintered wood flying into the air. His gate, the gate that had stood solid for years, was now nothing more than a pile of broken boards. Karen's car rolled to a stop just inside the property, its bumper scratched from the impact. Daniel rushed forward, anger and disbelief fighting for space in his mind. Before he could speak, Karen stepped out, not apologetic but irritated, as if she had been inconvenienced. "This road shouldn't be blocked," she said sharply, brushing dust from her sleeve. "It looks like a public path, and I don't have time for unnecessary obstacles." Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout, but he forced his voice to stay steady. "This isn't a public road. This is my land, and that gate was there to protect it. You can't just drive through like you own the place." Karen gave a dismissive laugh, waved a hand in the air, and without another word climbed back into her car. She reversed carelessly over the shattered wood and sped away, leaving Daniel standing alone with the wreckage. That evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, Daniel worked quietly to patch the gate with whatever boards he could salvage. His hands were steady, but his thoughts raced. The damage wasn't just to wood and nails. It was to his peace, to his right to live without interference. A part of him hoped it was a one-time incident, some strange misunderstanding that would never happen again. But deep down, in the silence of the night, he felt the weight of unease pressing on him. Something told him this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight, and Karen wasn't done yet. The morning after repairing his gate, Daniel walked the fence line with a heavy heart. The ranch had always been his haven, a place where the world's chaos could not reach him. But now every creak of wood and crunch of gravel set him on edge. He knew Karen wasn't the type to back down, and he was right. 2 days later, he received a letter in his mailbox. The bold letterhead of the Homeowners Association was stamped across the top. Daniel frowned as he opened it, scanning the words that made his stomach tighten. According to the HOA, his gate restricted community access and violated uniform neighborhood standards. He read the lines twice, then a third time, anger slowly rising. His land was outside the neighborhood boundaries. His gate had existed long before the HOA was ever formed. And yet here they were, demanding he remove it altogether. That evening, as he leaned against the repaired gate, Daniel saw headlights approaching. Karen's silver SUV slowed to a stop in front of him. She rolled down her window, her expression smug. "You got the notice, didn't you?" she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It would be so much easier for everyone if you just took this thing down." Daniel stood his ground. "This gate isn't going anywhere. It protects my livestock and my property. You don't have the right to tell me what I can or can't build on my land." Karen's eyes flashed with irritation. "You're being unreasonable. That road looks like a community path, and I'll use it if I want to. The HOA agrees with me. You're the one making things difficult." Her words left Daniel stunned, not because he believed her, but because of how casually she dismissed his rights. He could feel the tension building, the kind that warned him this wasn't just a passing disagreement. Karen had decided she was entitled to his land, and she wasn't going to stop until she got her way. Days turned into weeks, and the conflict worsened. Twice more, Daniel came home to find his gate shoved open, the latch broken, wood splintered across the gravel. Each time he fixed it, and each time Karen showed no remorse. She told anyone who would listen that Daniel was selfish, that he was blocking a necessary shortcut for the neighborhood. The HOA began sending more letters, each one more threatening than the last. They warned of fines, of legal action, of consequences if Daniel didn't comply. He spent long nights at his kitchen table, the letters spread out before him, wondering how something so absurd had spiraled so far out of control. What frustrated him most wasn't the damage or the letters. It was the arrogance. Karen acted as though she was untouchable. as though no matter how many times she tore through his gate, she would never face accountability. And as Daniel nailed a fresh beam across the entrance one late afternoon, he realized something chilling. Karen wasn't just testing his patience. She was testing how far she could push before he broke. Daniel had never been a man to stir conflict. He believed in solving problems through calm words and reason, but as the weeks dragged on, he realized that logic was powerless against Karen's determination. She seemed to thrive on confrontation, and the HOA gave her the perfect stage to amplify her voice. His first attempt at resolution was a conversation. One Saturday morning, Daniel walked up to Karen's house, his hat in hand and his temper buried deep. When she answered the door, he tried to keep his tone steady. "Karen, this has to stop. That gate is mine, and every time you crash through it, you're not just damaging property, you're endangering my animals. I don't want to involve authorities, but I will if I have to." Karen leaned against the doorframe, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Authorities?" she said, feigning shock. "Oh, Daniel, I already spoke to the HOA. They agree that your gate is an eyesore and a hazard. If anyone's breaking the rules, it's you." Her dismissal was like a slap in the face. Daniel turned and walked away, fists clenched. He had tried civility, and she had twisted it into another reason to belittle him. The next step was the HOA board. Daniel attended one of their meetings, sitting at the long polished table under the buzzing fluorescent lights. He explained the situation carefully, laying out photos of the damage and records proving his property was outside their jurisdiction. For a moment, he thought reason might finally prevail. But Karen was there too, and when it was her turn to speak, she unleashed a performance. "I feel unsafe," she declared dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest. "That gate blocks an essential path for residents. It's intimidating, and Daniel has been confrontational. I've had no choice but to drive through it." Murmurs filled the room, and Daniel felt the air shift against him. By the time the meeting ended, the board offered no support. Instead, they warned him that further resistance could lead to penalties. It was clear then. Logic had failed him. Worse, Karen had painted herself as the victim, twisting the truth so effortlessly that others believed her. He filed a complaint with local authorities, but even that led nowhere. The officer who came out listened politely, then explained that unless there was direct evidence of malicious intent or trespassing, his options were limited. A gate, he was told, was considered a civil matter. Daniel felt the weight of helplessness pressing on his chest as the officer drove away, leaving him alone once more with broken boards and mounting frustration. Meanwhile, neighbors avoided the issue altogether. A few offered sympathetic glances. Some even whispered their support when Karen wasn't around. But no one dared to stand with him publicly. Karen's influence in the HOA had made her untouchable, and everyone else was too afraid to be her next target. Daniel sat on his porch one evening, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. He had tried everything. Conversation, meetings, even the law, and every path had led to the same place, nowhere. Karen wasn't going to stop. She was too sure of herself, too convinced of her own power. And as Daniel stared at the gate that had once symbolized peace, he realized something he didn't want to admit. If he didn't change his approach, she would keep tearing it down until there was nothing left. The night Karen finally pushed him past the breaking point began like any other. The crickets hummed in the tall grass, and the air was cool against Daniel's skin as he checked the locks on the barn. For a brief moment, he felt that familiar comfort, the sense that the ranch was holding steady despite the storms pressing in. But that fragile peace was shattered with the roar of an engine. Headlights cut across the pasture, and before Daniel could react, the sound of splintering wood ripped through the night. He spun around just in time to see Karen's SUV barreling through his gate, snapping it in half as if it were nothing more than kindling. His heart lurched. This time, the damage wasn't confined to the gate. His cows, spooked by the commotion, stumbled toward the opening, their hooves pounding the earth in panic. "Karen?" Daniel shouted, racing forward, but she didn't stop. Her tires kicked up dirt as she sped off into the distance, leaving behind nothing but dust and ruin. Daniel managed to corral the animals back inside the pasture, but not before one young calf nearly slipped through the breach. His hands trembled as he latched the temporary fencing together, the hammer nearly slipping from his grip. The cost of repairs, the risk to his livestock, the sheer disrespect, it was too much. His patience, once as sturdy as the gate itself, had finally snapped. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the pile of broken boards stacked outside the window. He thought about every attempt he had made to stop her. The conversations, the meetings, the complaints, all of it had been twisted, dismissed, or ignored. Karen had turned herself into a storm that refused to pass, and the HOA had become her shelter. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at his bones. But beneath the weariness, something else stirred. Resolve. He wasn't going to let her tear through his life anymore. If Karen believed she could keep crashing into his world without consequence, she was about to be proven wrong. His eyes shifted back to the broken gate, but this time he didn't see defeat. He saw an opportunity. What if the gate wasn't just wood and nails anymore? What if it became something stronger? Something that would stand no matter how hard Karen tried to break it? She had grown bold because every time she pushed, she succeeded. If he wanted to stop her, he would need to change the rules of the game. The idea settled into his mind slowly, like embers catching flame. He would rebuild, but this time the gate would be different. It would look ordinary, the same as before, but beneath its weathered boards, it would be a fortress. Daniel rose from the table, his decision made. He had tried patience, he had tried diplomacy, but now it was time for strategy. If Karen wanted to play a game of power, she was about to meet a gate that would not bow to her arrogance. The next morning, Daniel drove into town with a quiet determination in his eyes. He knew exactly what he needed, and this time he wasn't settling for quick fixes or temporary repairs. At the hardware store, he loaded his truck with steel posts, heavy-duty hinges, and bags of concrete. To the casual eye, it looked like he was simply restocking supplies for ranch work. In reality, he was gathering the pieces of a plan, one that would finally put an end to Karen's reckless assaults on his peace. Back at the ranch, he set to work. The old, splintered boards were cleared away, and in their place, he dug deep holes for reinforced posts. Each one was anchored with concrete poured into the earth, hidden beneath the soil where no one would see it. He welded steel supports inside the new wooden frame, cloaking the strength of the structure beneath a surface that looked rustic and familiar. From the road, it appeared to be the same simple wooden gate that had stood there for years. But Daniel knew the truth. This gate wasn't just wood anymore. It was a wall in disguise, built to withstand whatever fury Karen decided to unleash. The process took days, and each swing of the hammer felt like a release of frustration. For every insult Karen had hurled, for every board she had splintered, Daniel drove another nail with steady resolve. The ranch had always been his home, and he wasn't about to let anyone, not even the HOA's most entitled member, take that away. By the time the last hinge was secured, the gate stood tall once more, looking no different from the one before it. To an untrained eye, it was just another wooden barrier guarding the edge of the ranch. But Daniel knew that beneath its weathered boards lay a trap of his own design, one that would turn Karen's arrogance back on her. Now came the hardest part: waiting. The first few days passed quietly. Every time Daniel heard the crunch of gravel on the road, his heart raced, half expecting Karen's SUV to come barreling toward the gate. But it was always someone else, a neighbor passing by or the mail carrier dropping off letters. Each time, he exhaled with both relief and anticipation. At night, he would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, eyes fixed on the entrance. The crickets sang their usual chorus, but beneath it, Daniel felt the tension thrumming in the air. He knew Karen, she wasn't finished. Entitlement like hers never retreated without one last strike. The gate stood as a silent sentinel, daring her to try again. And as the days stretched on, Daniel's anticipation turned into certainty. It wasn't a question of if she would return, but when. He didn't know what night it would happen, or how fast she would come barreling in, but he was ready. This time the gate wouldn't crumble. This time it would hold. It happened on a warm evening, the kind where the air hung heavy and restless, as though even the wind knew something was about to break. Daniel was feeding the horses when the familiar rumble of an engine carried across the fields. His body tensed. He knew that sound. It was Karen's SUV. Headlights flared at the end of the road, cutting a sharp beam across the dusk. The vehicle slowed for only a moment, then surged forward. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. She was going to do it again. Only this time, the gate was ready. The SUV roared closer, tires crunching over gravel, the engine whining as Karen pressed harder on the gas. In the blink of an eye, the vehicle slammed into the gate, but instead of splintering like it always had before, the wooden boards barely shuddered. The reinforced steel and concrete posts held firm. The sound of impact tore through the air, metal crumpling, glass shattering, rubber screeching against the dirt. Daniel rushed toward the entrance, his boots pounding the ground. The once pristine SUV now sat mangled against the gate, its hood bent like a crushed tin can. Smoke hissed from the engine, and the driver's side door creaked open. Karen stumbled out, her face pale with shock, clutching her arm as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the deafening crash. One by one, they gathered at the roadside, whispering among themselves as they stared at the scene. For the first time, Karen's arrogance had backfired in front of an audience she couldn't control. Daniel stood tall, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "I told you, Karen, this is private property. That gate doesn't belong to the HOA, and it never did. You had no right to keep destroying it." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. Her usual retorts, her rehearsed complaints, all failed her. The gate stood unbroken behind her wrecked car, a silent testament to the truth Daniel had been trying to prove all along. When the authorities arrived, they took one look at the scene and saw it for what it was. Karen wasn't a victim, she was the aggressor. Witnesses stepped forward. Neighbors who had been silent for too long now spoke openly, their courage bolstered by the undeniable evidence before them. The HOA's threats collapsed in the face of reality. They could no longer fine Daniel or accuse him of obstruction. The reinforced gate hadn't harmed anyone. It had simply stood its ground, just as Daniel had every right to do. Karen, on the other hand, was left with the consequences of her actions and the cost of repairing her own vehicle. For the first time in months, Daniel felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He hadn't needed anger. He hadn't needed revenge. All he had needed was to stand firm and trust that eventually, the truth would reveal itself. And now, with the broken SUV as proof, Karen could no longer twist the story. The silence after the crash was different from the silence Daniel had lived with for months. This one wasn't filled with tension or dread. It was filled with relief. The reinforced gate stood tall, unyielding, while Karen's SUV sat crippled against it, a clear reminder that her entitlement had finally met its match. In the days that followed, the HOA went unusually quiet. The letters stopped arriving, the threats ceased, and the board members who once sided with Karen seemed to vanish from the conflict altogether. Without her SUV and without her carefully crafted story of victimhood, Karen had lost her leverage. She no longer had the power to twist the narrative in her favor. Daniel repaired the minor scratches on the gate, though in truth, the structure had held stronger than he could have imagined. Each time he ran his hand across the wooden boards, he felt a renewed sense of pride. This gate was more than protection for his land now. It was a symbol of standing firm against arrogance, a lesson carved in wood, steel, and perseverance. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began to stop by. Some offered apologies for not speaking up sooner, and others congratulated him for holding his ground. One older rancher even tipped his hat and said, "Took someone with real backbone to do what you did, Daniel." Most folks would have caved. Daniel never gloated, not once. He didn't need to. Victory wasn't about seeing Karen humiliated. It was about reclaiming his peace, about knowing he had defended what was his without backing down. He treated the incident not as a triumph over a neighbor, but as proof that boundaries mattered, that respect and accountability still had weight, even when it seemed like they didn't. Karen, for her part, withdrew from the spotlight. The once loud, demanding voice of the HOA no longer carried the same authority. Whispers around the community suggested she was too embarrassed to show her face, too humiliated to stir up another fight. Whether she learned a lesson or not, Daniel didn't care. It was no longer his burden to carry. On one quiet evening, weeks after the confrontation, Daniel sat on his porch, watching the sun sink into the horizon. The gate stood firm in the fading light, and the ranch behind it thrummed with life, the horses grazing peacefully, the cattle calm once more. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt the kind of peace he had feared was gone forever. He took a slow breath and let the quiet settle around him. All the frustration, all the exhaustion, all the sleepless nights had led to this moment of calm. He had defended what was his, not through anger, but through resilience and resolve. And as he sipped his coffee, a thought crossed his mind, one that lingered long after the sun disappeared. What would you have done if someone kept trying to bulldoze through your peace? Would you give in or stand strong like Daniel did?